Okay, this is Mozart's name. As you can see, we're talking about Mozart tonight. The whole evening is Mozart. Then we'll do Beethoven next time when we get into romantic. He had a really huge driver's license. I mean, you can see that he had to. This was his legal official, written down name, which begs the question: where did Amadeus come from? And a great question indeed. Amadeo means, that's what that is. It's popcorn. I will remind you when I give you the really cool announcement that popcorn and wine is involved. So it makes it an incredible announcement. He used to go, people would call him Amade or Amadeo, which means loved of God. It was his nickname. Amadeus was a name he would use as a joke. So it's as though I referred to myself as Bruce the Goose or something that I made up. He used it only humorously. What is deliciously ironic is that's how we know him now. And I think he would love that. I think it would have just pleased him no end. Mozart was the seventh of 7 children, only 2 of whom survived. So aren't we lucky? I mean, in that sense. Bach, you will recall way back when we were talking about Bach had 20 children, and only 7 of them outlived him. So it's hard sometimes in the day and age in which we live ourselves, where infant mortality is not the common thing. That was not the case. And that had to have a fairly profound effect. And by that I mean, from the moment you were born, so to speak, you were surrounded by people dying. I mean, it was a trepidatious time. I mention that now, so when we get to the Requiem, it makes more sense. In any case, 7th of 7 children, only 2 of them survived. His sister, who doesn't get the credit she deserves, except tonight, her sister was named Nannerl, was her name, Nannerl. Most people are not aware. You know that Mozart toured. We're going to get into that. His father sort of Svengali'd him around Europe, and we'll get to that. But she toured with him. They toured together. Mozart and Nannerl toured together until she was too old. And by too old, it meant marrying age, essentially, which was, of course, 12 and up in the day. So it was not considered a proper occupation for a woman to be out touring and playing and doing the thing. Different times, and so she went back to Salzburg and lived out her life. We know that she wrote music because they being Wolfie and Nannerl, they discussed it, but none of it survived. We don't have any music by her, but we know that she wrote some. Not that he ever would have or had any need to, but I always just make it up in my head that something that's attributed to Mozart that she wrote, in there, or that she borrowed a melody, he borrowed a melody from her, or whatever. It doesn't have to be true for me to pretend that. She eventually, to finish with her, I'll come back to her a little bit. She married, did Nannerl. She married a low-level sort of a duke or somebody, a baron or whatever, and lived out in a castle someplace, and not a very fun life. She lived out of town. She wasn't I don't know, treated all that well, but it was just the cold, dark. She's married to an old baron guy, and it wasn't the happiest of lives. Mercifully, at some point prior to her death, he died, and so she moved back to Salzburg and lived there, and was friends with Stanzi. And we'll get to Stanzi, Mozart's wife. So he, she, they, when he, she, they, I just said that. When Mozart married Stanzi, and we'll get to that as we move along, but when he married, his wife and his sister, not surprisingly I suppose, didn't get along all that well. But when Mozart died, Stanzi moved to Salzburg, his hometown, and they, Nannerl and Stanzi lived almost next door to each other, and they kind of hung out and were friends for the remainder of their lives. So the both widows and living close together and having Mozart in common and so on. So I always think that's kind of cool. I just like to picture them down at the local espresso bar hanging out and trading Mozart stories. I think that's probably not all that far from the truth. Mozart, surprisingly, I suppose, had no formal schooling, none at all. His father, so far as we know, was his only teacher. Now, Mozart's father doesn't have the best reputation, particularly if you've seen Amadeus, but even if you haven't, he was not, as we will see, as I will demonstrate, he was not the nicest human being. He certainly wasn't the nicest to Mozart. But credit where credit is due. If that was Mozart's only teacher, okay. I mean, he was a musician, and he taught him music and did the other stuff, so we'll get to that. But far be it's like with the Catholic Church, there's a lot of negative things you can say, but there's some positive things you can say too. They hung on to the arts and, stuff. So credit where credit is due. His father was his only teacher. Here are some age things to put Mozart in perspective. At the age of 4, he started playing the harpsichord. At the age of 5, he began to compose. At the age of 6, he began to perform. At the age of 8, he wrote his first symphony and published 4 sonatas. At the age of 11, he wrote his first oratorio. And at the age of 12, he wrote his first opera. I just read that every time I feel anywhere nearly good about myself. Whenever I get up and drink a cup of coffee and think, I'm a really cool person, I just read that list. And I go, more coffee! Or something. When he was, one of the most interesting things, mind-boggling things to me, is when he was 14, he went to the Sistine Chapel and he had a work, and it doesn't matter to you. What matters to me is I can't remember the composer's name, or even the work. It doesn't matter. He heard a work, a motet in 9 parts. In other words, there's 9 lines of music going on. It was a 2-choir thing, by the way. That I remember. It was a 2-choir thing, 9 parts. And he hears it at the Sistine Chapel. He wants a copy of it because he thinks it's a great piece of music. Can't get a copy of it because it belongs to the Pope. And you just don't hand out these copies willy-nilly. So Mozart went home and wrote it down from memory. Whenever I think anything good about myself, I remind myself that, yeah, he heard it, wrote it down from memory. He only got caught when he went back the next day with the music to check it and see if he'd gotten it right. And they found him with it, and they dragged him before the Pope because the kid stole the music. Interestingly enough, the Pope was amused, patted him on the head and said, "Smart kid." So yeah, no kidding. Estimates have been done that, and this is suspect. I think IQ is suspect in general. I mean, the definition of a high IQ is someone who can take an IQ test well. That may or may not relate to actual intelligence, as we know, and so on and so forth. But people who worship at the throne of IQs have estimated that that Mozart's IQ was something around 190. Now, as you know, well, you may or may not, 140 is generally considered to be knocking at the door of genius, and it ends at 200. It depends on which IQ scale you're using, but all odd numbers, but 190. I mention this for a particular reason. It's interesting, but Mozart, as we will see, as we will hear, Mozart did not always get along well with his fellow man, a fellow person. He was considered to be odd in any number of ways. But this doesn't surprise me. I mean, I don't know how many people you know of, preternatural sort of IQ levels. Present company accepted. But they are not always, in my experience, well adjusted to functioning in the world around them necessarily. Bobby Fischer had to have help, getting across the street. I mean, seriously, that kind of thing. So I mentioned that because there are estimates that said that I've read. If you are more than 10 points IQ apart from someone else, you can't really communicate with them, not honestly, because you mean different things when you use the same word. There's that. So we're talking the same language, but we're not really saying the same things. Now, I don't know, I mean, as IQ goes, I don't know if that's generally true. But if it is true with 10 points, can you imagine a 50-point spread? Of course he thought everyone was stupid. How could you not think that? I mean, really. And because he did not have the political savvy to not say you're stupid to the emperor, for example, things did not always go as well for Mozart as they might have otherwise. He wrote, as I mentioned, 600 compositions, by the way. Wow. We have at least 600. Obviously, there are more. You lose them along the way. But 600 plus, 50 symphonies, 50 plus symphonies, actually. Here is a bit of, just because it's fun to share with you, the 25th one. Now, while we listen to this, I want to remind you what classical music sounds like and what the goal of the classical period was. But that comes across to me as a little dark and ponderous and heavy and romantic, which is also why Mozart didn't always get along, because he was writing about not always, we'll play some other stuff, but he was writing a good 50 years ahead of his time in some instances. I mean, you listen to the last of Mozart, and if you didn't know the music, you could just as easily say that's Beethoven. And Beethoven, of course, threaded the line between, you know, classical and romantic. He was the line. So he started in classical, but he wound up romantic. And you listen to that darkness of Beethoven, yeah, I find that in Mozart, which is why, once again, Mozart was not the most popular composer of his day. Mozart was not the most popular composer, any more than Bach was. Bach wasn't the most popular composer of his day. He wasn't even considered a great composer. He was considered a great organist and a great improviser. But, yeah, he writes a few things. So that's why when people, often they'll ask me, so who today is going to be famous in 100 years? Oh, please. I have no freaking idea. I mean, I have some guesses. You know, I can say, well, I think, but if you'd ask anybody in Mozart's time, they would not probably have told you Mozart, interestingly enough. You know who they probably would have told you? Probably would have told you Salieri. We'll get to Salieri, or Tony, as I call him. We're very close. When Mozart was young, his father took him on tour. His father was a bit of an opportunist, no question about it. He saw that his son was uber talented. His son and daughter were uber talented, and so he took them on the road and made a good amount of money. Frankly, off of both of them. I've been in the house in Salzburg, where Mozart was born, and I've been in the house on the other side of the river that they bought with the proceeds from the tour. Nice house. So it went okay. So he goes on tour, he does his thing, he's greatly vetted, everybody loves him, you know, blah, blah, blah. And he goes back after this tour, or these tours, and he goes to work for his father's employer, who was the Archbishop of Salzburg. So Mozart's dad was a violinist, or violist, it doesn't really matter, Bruce, but he worked for the Archbishop. So Mozart goes to Amadeus, obviously goes to work for the Archbishop. He is not happy. He feels constricted. He doesn't, Mozart doesn't deal well with authority, to say the very least. And when you've been in the courts of Europe, when you've been applauded by popes, when Marie Antoinette, you know, kisses you on the head and you go, you know, will you marry me? And everybody laughs, true story. Going back to work for the Archbishop, who was very conservative, had no use for symphonies, had no use for operas, so he wanted choral church music, and not that there's anything wrong with it, but Mozart wanted to write other things, and his employer was certainly not interested in that, so he asked to be dismissed, like, I want to be fired. And he was. The Archbishop said, great, go. So Mozart goes. And he tours around himself. He takes tours himself. On this occasion, he goes with his mom. He goes with his mother. His dad stays in Salzburg. His sister stays in Salzburg. And he travels with his mom. While he's on tour, he's out and around. He's looking for jobs, frankly, and nobody wants to hire him. Which you would think, well, why not? I mean, he's got an IQ of 109, he writes a lot of great music. For one thing, he was young and he had no experience. Do you remember Haydn's job description? Do you remember take care of the orchestra, oversee all the instruments, which the emperor, not the emperor, but what's his name, owns, write the music, how much music had to be written per day, I mean, how you should dress and all that? Mozart was nowhere suited for that. And so nobody wanted to hire him. They also thought that if they hired him, the prevailing wisdom was, if they hired him, they would also have to hire his father. And they didn't want to have to hire two people. So he wasn't finding any work. He moved in, he fell in love with Aloysia Weber. Some of you, the composer, not Webern, different, but there's also a composer by the name of Weber. He fell in love with her. He was sort of living with the family there while he was traveling around part-time. And he, in fact, proposes to her. She turns him down Not because she wanted to enter a convent. You remember poor Haydn. She turned him down because she wanted a career. She was a singer, and I'm going to get to that in a moment here. She was a singer, so she wanted a career and turned him down. So here's Mozart out touring, falls in love with a girl, asks her to marry him, she turns him down, can't get a job, and his mother dies.
Whoops.
So he went back to Salzburg and invented country western music. That's not what happened. But he certainly could have. Yeah, he went back to, metaphorically, went back to Salzburg with his tail between his legs and got his job back with the emperor, who did hire him back. The Archbishop, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Too many aristocrats. With the Archbishop, absolutely. His job there is he's an organist, and he teaches the choir boys, and he occasionally gets to compose some church music. Not that great of an experience for somebody with his ambitions. So he's doing this. He's not happy. The Archbishop then goes to Vienna to celebrate the ascension, now we get to the emperor, of Joseph II, the crowning of Joseph II. And needless to say, the Archbishop, because he is in the political position he's in, is invited to attend that. While he's there in Vienna, obviously Mozart wants to perform for the cognoscente and for the emperor and for the crowds and so on and so forth. And the Archbishop says, no, you are my servant. You perform only for me, and when I say so. This didn't go over well with Mozart, who then either quit or was fired. It depends on who you ask as to which happened. But they came to a separation of the ways. This meant that he was virtually disinherited at court, and he was quite literally disinherited by his father. He was told, that's it, you're disinherited, don't ever come home, don't come back to Salzburg. You're on your own. Wow. Harsh. Harsh, but that's what happened. Okay. It is, he stayed in Vienna. He moved in with the Webers. This is when he officially moved in with them. And by this point, Aloysia, to whom he had proposed, but who wanted a career instead, had married someone else. Typical woman. In the old days. Yeah. Certainly not any longer. No, not at all. And instead, he marries her younger sister. Remember Haydn? Haydn got turned down, and he married her older sister. Mozart married a younger sister, Constanza, and as we know in the film Amadeus, Stanzi. This is where the film Amadeus picks up. So everything we've just talked about is backstory. You get a little bit of that in Amadeus, but more or less, the film picks up at this moment where Amadeus officially gets kicked out of home and moves to Vienna, the music capital of the world, and marries Stanzi, and begins what, regrettably for all of us, turns out to be a fairly short career. Stanzi was a singer, as was her sister, which explains, I can't remember precisely if he wrote this for Aloysia, but it's just a great excuse to play this number. That's really hard to do. I just want to mention that that's really hard to do. That's Sumi Joe. Yeah. Let me double check. Who I wanted was Cecilia Bartoli, but I couldn't find it. So yeah, I think that's Sumi Joe. Sumi Joe. Did I ever tell you my Cecilia Bartoli story? I can't remember.
No.
Oh, it's such a great story. I don't have time. Yes, I do. So, Cecilia Bartoli, I don't know if you know Cecilia Bartoli. She's my Italian soprano. She's sort of toward the tail end of her career now. But my favorite soprano, I mean, coloratura is just incredible soprano. I mean, not of all time, but living. And so I was working at KUSC Radio, and I had not heard Cecilia Bartoli. She was up and coming. I grabbed a CD. There was going to be a traffic thing. I had like 30 seconds to kill. There was a 30-second cut. You put it on. You play it. You take your chances. And I heard her, and I came back on, and I said, "Oh my God! I wonder if she'd marry me and have my babies." The station director was in my office in no time and said, "You can't say that." And I said, "No, but I really wonder." So then it turns out Cecilia Bartoli came to town. She was going to be at the Ambassador Auditorium with my radio station, KUSC, was sponsoring it. So we went, and I said, I went with another host, and so I said, "Let's go backstage and meet her afterwards. We can go backstage." We had things like hanging. And so we go, and she goes, "Okay, but only if you ask her to marry you." Okay. So we go backstage, and sure enough, we're in the green room, and she's kind of standing behind a table, and people are filing by and saying hello to her, and her people are on a couch behind her and doing the whole thing. So we come up, we're introduced, and I said, "Look, everybody, anything that could possibly be said to you about your voice has already been said, so I'll just cut to right to the chase. Will you marry me?" And God love her. She said, with this great Italian accent, "Well, I'll think about it." I said, "Let's just leave it at that." So far as I know, she's still there. Where was I? Oh yes, I wanted Cecilia. We got Sumi Joe. It doesn't matter. All right. So now he's in Vienna. His first years in Vienna were very prosperous. He did very well. There's this whole image of Mozart starving to death. He may have been hungry once in a while, but it wasn't because he didn't make good money. He made great money. Well, he made good money. He made good money. What he didn't know was how to manage it. He didn't know, and neither did Stanzi know how to manage it. So there was a pretty good income coming in, but neither one of them managed it very well. Mozart was helped quite frequently. He was a Mason. He was a member of the Masonic Lodge. And so as a Mason, they helped him from time to time financially. Again, not because he wasn't making money, but he was, spending more than he made. But he was never really in abject poverty. Ironically, and this is how we know he wasn't destitute, Mozart was in some ways more popular outside Austria, outside of Vienna, than he was in the country. There were a number of other countries that wanted to hire him. Czechoslovakia was crazy about Mozart. Don Giovanni was commissioned by Prague Opera, and it took place in Czechoslovakia. And I don't know if you remember Don Giovanni, but the guy that, rapes and pillages and then gets dragged off to hell for his sins. It's a dark story. The Czechoslovakians loved it. The Austrians not so much. So he was offered job opportunities all the time and he turned them down. So that's not what you do if you're, destitute. He turned them down because he wanted to live in Vienna. Vienna was the music capital of the world. That's where he wanted to succeed. He didn't want to be good in Montana. He wanted to be good in New York. I mean, nothing against Montana. Perfectly decent place. During his lifetime with Stanzi, his rather brief marriage with Stanzi, they had 6 children altogether, 2 of whom survived. So 2 of the 6. Interestingly enough, both sons were musically talented, but neither one went on to make a great living. And when the sons died out, that was it for the Mozart dynasty. Neither one of them married, did not have any children. I think the other one did not marry, had illegitimate children, but those don't count. So the Mozart name died out. I mean, that was it with his 2 sons. One of his sons, interestingly enough, bought a country estate with the proceeds of 3 performances of Marriage of Figaro. So right after Mozart died, he started doing very well. Isn't that the irony of life? Okay, now I'll leave Mozart there, just on the verge of his untimely demise for a moment, and talk a little bit about Antonio Salieri. Salieri has not gotten a lot of great press, which is in some ways quite unfortunate. Salieri wrote his first opera when he was 20. No, it's not 12. But I haven't cranked out my first one yet, so, I mean, 20 still shows up to me like not bad. By the age of 24, Salieri, who was Italian, obviously, was court composer to the Emperor of Austria. By the age of 24. Well, okay, say what you will, not too shabby. Not too shabby. So Salieri did quite well for himself. He had a reputation for being benevolent, quick-tempered. Well, I said he was Italian. Quick-tempered, easily pacified, but he also had a reputation for helping poor musicians. So his reputation was not, was not terrible. He also taught, did Salieri. He was the teacher of Beethoven. Beethoven studied with Salieri, Schubert, Liszt, and Mozart Jr. studied with Salieri. And you'll recall that Haydn's last performance of Creation was conducted by Salieri. So he was very well respected and known, and so on and so forth. Eventually, Salieri retired on full salary after 50 years of working for, I think, 3 emperors. 50 years of service in the court, and retired on full salary. Now, here's really cool news. I'm so pleased about this, because Sam and I have been talking about it for a while. I've been talking about it at Orcas Center, and putting a lot of people, and Ingrid here at the library. We're going to show Amadeus at Orcas Center on Monday the 24th. Like, not this coming Monday, but the Monday after, so a week from this coming Monday. We still have a few details to work out. I still have to get popcorn and wine there. And I don't know when it's going to start. I still need to double check with Jake and do some things. But the library and Orcas Center have sort of gone in together. And we're going to show Amadeus. And then at the end of it, which will kind of cut this a little bit short, although not terribly short. What time is it, by the way? Where is it? Are we doing okay? Oh, yeah, wow, it's not that short at all. I'll talk a little bit about what's true and not true, because it's a fascinating film. First of all, if you haven't seen Amadeus, brilliant freaking film. Brilliant film. Tom Hulce plays Mozart. F. Murray Abraham played Salieri, won Best Actor, and Amadeus won Best Picture. So I mean, it's a fine film. There are 3 kinds of information in the film. 3 kinds of things that happen. There's stuff that happened that we absolutely know this is true. This is what happened. there is stuff that happened that we know did not happen. This absolutely did not happen. And there's stuff that could have happened. Maybe, maybe not. Those three kinds of information are really brilliantly blended. For example, Salieri, not to spoil the movie, Salieri didn't have anything to do with killing Mozart. He didn't. And here's why. What was his motivation? Who was court composer? Salieri. He had nothing to be jumped. Mozart was no threat to him. Now, in the film, Mozart, Salieri is portrayed as having an understanding that Mozart's music is so much more brilliant than his, and he's insanely jealous. And maybe, but there was no evidence for that. I mean, there was no evidence for Salieri to say his music is better than mine, because all of the CDs being sold were Salieri's. I mean, he was doing well. He was also in a much better political position. If he'd had anything to do with Mozart's death, it is unlikely that Stanzi would have given Mozart Jr. over to be his teacher. So, again, it's an interesting rumor. I'll talk more about this on Monday. It got started, the rumor got started based on a Pushkin play. A play by Pushkin. It was actually a long poem by Pushkin and the Russian poet. And it was a poem called Mozart and Salieri. And in it, he alleged that that Salieri had something to do with killing Mozart. Not likely at all. I mean, it just, yeah, probably. There's no reason to believe that. Probably rheumatic fever. Mozart had rheumatic fever as a child. Barely survived. We almost lost 6 out of 7, as opposed to the 5. So that's probably what it was. The rest of it, I'm going to say, because I want to play some of the Requiem for you and talk about it. It's certainly played in the film. So the Requiem. This part is true. Mozart died before he finished it. That part is true. It was commissioned by a stranger. That part is true. Mozart didn't know who the stranger was. We do. But you'll have to come Monday for me to tell you. We know who commissioned the Requiem. We know who commissioned it and why. We know that Mozart didn't finish it. We know that Salieri did not have anything to do with finishing it. A composer by the name of Franz Süssmayr had to do with finishing it, and maybe one other composer. This is what a lonely old man I am. I've read at least 3 books on what part of Mozart's Requiem did Mozart write. I bet you I've read 1,200 pages on which measures were Mozart. I'm a sad and lonely man who's never written an opera, even at age 12. There is a lot of debate. I mean, I say that facetious, but read the 3 books, I really have. There's a lot of debate on what Mozart wrote and what he didn't. And I'll talk about that a little bit more on Monday too, because he died before it was finished. Stanzi wanted the money. She gave it to another composer who may or may not have finished it. He gave it back, said, I can't do it. He may or may not have worked on it. She gave it to one of Mozart's students. The student has made claims about which part he wrote and which part Mozart wrote that seem to us historically to be not accurate. And let's face it, it's in his best interest to say, oh yes, this brilliant part here, I wrote that. Yeah, well. So there's a lot of debate. But what is true is he died before he finished it. And we do know for sure that he wrote, pretty much completed about the first 3 movements. And then there's a lot of debate about the middle. And the end of it is really based on, I think it's a double fugue based on one of the first movement themes. So you can sort of say Mozart wrote this, even though it was cobbled together by and I don't want to get all that wonky about it, but people often say, let's do the last thing Mozart ever wrote, the Requiem. It's not the last thing he ever wrote. Ave Verum Corpus, a piece for SATB choir, was the last thing he ever wrote. I once did a concert, and now I'm going to play some. I want to play some of the Requiem for you because I want to tell you why it's so brilliant. I once did a concert. Mozart wrote one Requiem. So did Salieri. He wrote one Requiem. So I did a concert where I did both Requiems on the same, which I could hire the same orchestra, so it worked out pretty well. So I did the Salieri Requiem and I did the Mozart Requiem. It was really cool. But at the end of the concert, I finished with the Ave Verum Corpus. And I said, just to be clear, let's do the last thing Mozart ever wrote. And it's a little 3.5 minute piece that you would hear in a church. It's an SATB piece, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And I said, when you're done, when you're done, don't applaud, because applause is the way. I heard somebody say this. Applause is the way an audience reminds the performer that they're immortal. Because white noise erases everything. You hear something gorgeous, and then the gorgeous is gone. You want the gorgeous to stay with you. Don't applaud. And so I finished the number, and I said, just after we're done, just go. See, that hangs in there, as opposed to being erased. It was a great concert, one of the favorite concerts I did. All right, so Mozart does write the Requiem. Here is the opening movement of said Requiem. And it's the classical period. And I grant you that Requiems aren't supposed to be, light and cheerful. But, oh my God, and this is just the start of it. This is just the start of it. And you would think that after this, he lightens up a little bit. But oh no. I mean, this is Mahler-esque. If you're not already dead, you want to be. Listen to, and we'll go on to the second movement. This just unbelievably weighty. He doesn't ease you into it. He just right away he tells you with notes from the very beginning, this person's dead and you're going to be dead pretty soon too. I mean, that's about the only way to listen to that. So you get to the end of this and you think, okay, that's done. Now we can talk about the joys of heaven or whatever. It's the Kyrie, it's the Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, so now we can lighten up a bit. No. Oh my God. And it's that line, and it's a fugue, and he just keeps repeating and beating you up with it and pounding you with it. And so now you've got a gun in your mouth. You're listening to this thing, and you think, okay, at the end of it, it's all going to be better. No, no. And in fact, I will tell you, one of maybe my favorite moment in all of music is the silence between the Kyrie and the Dies Irae. Because you think you get, and I'm going to play it for you in a minute, the Day of Wrath. And there's a wonderful moment in the film where Mozart says to Salieri, sent to the eternal fires of hell, do you believe in that? And Salieri, of course, this did not happen, but it's a great moment. Salieri goes, oh yeah? Yeah, I do. I do believe in that. So you get to the end of the Kyrie, which has gone on now for 5, no, it's not that long, it's just 2 or 3 minutes of this pounding thing. And you think there's going to be a rest, and then there's this moment, this delicious moment of silence before he goes into the Day of Wrath. Listen to this, it's just, I wish I'd written it. It's the end of the Kyrie. I have to back it up a little bit. It's enough to make you believe in hell. I mean, seriously, you listen to that when I musicalize hell, that's what I play in my head. Just this rage of pain and despair and hate and destruction. It's magnificent. It's just magnificent. And of course, then he died. Very shortly after that, I mean, like within hours, maybe.
Oh, wow.
He outlined some of the rest of it, but it's entirely possible he outlined in the future. So we don't know, but certainly within days. Certainly within days. Wow. I made it up. I made it up because he didn't finish it. God knows what he would have written. I mean, seriously. I make it up that whoever's in charge of when we live or die decided he should die because you just can't write beyond that. It's astounding. It's an astounding work. He was an astounding individual. Monday, the 24th, we'll look at Amadeus, and then afterwards we'll talk a little bit about what's true and not true. A lot of it is true. I think a lot of what's true about it is his character. He was a brat, and had a tawdry little sense of humor. I mean, you know, he was not well accepted in polite company for a lot of reasons. But man, could he write music. Just astounding. So we'll do that on the 24th, and next week we'll talk about wackadoodle Beethoven. I'll see you then.